welcome to the Harvard Data Science Initiative workshop on data science and the physical sciences. I'm Matthew Schwartz. I'm a professor in physics here at Harvard across the river. So it's great to be here. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what this workshop is about and why we're having it and what's going on. So as you know, the Harvard Data Science Initiative covers many, many different areas. But one of the areas that is very exciting in the development of artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular is applications to various problems in physical sciences. And the idea here is to sort of give an overview of some of the interesting developments from a few people who are directly involved in using these tools to solve problems. So I'm one of them. I work in high energy particle physics. I'm not giving a talk, so I'm not going to tell you about applications. But we have at 9:15 Lina Necib, who's over here, is going to talk about some applications of machine learning and data science in astronomy and astrophysics. And then at 9:45, Lina over here will talk about some applications in engineering in dynamical systems. And then we'll have a little bit of a break. And then Carlos, who hasn't arrived yet, will talk about some interesting use of machine learning in what he calls the invisible universe, which is mostly about neutrino physics, which is another interesting topic. And then we plan at 11 o'clock to have a kind of panel discussion, which will be me, Lina, Carlos, and Alyssa Goodman will also be on the panel. And we'll just kind of take some questions, but also discuss some ideas and talk about a little bit where we see machine learning going and the future of data science in various aspects of physical sciences. So let me just sort of give you an overview. I had ChatGPT generate this picture. See what it thought data science in physical sciences was, and I guess there's a big brain in the middle and everything's connected. But why is AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, why is it well adapted to physical sciences, and what do we do with it? Well, one thing is there's huge amounts of data. There's a lot of really quantitative input to train on and to apply these techniques to. The problems are important. There's applications, but also fundamental questions that are of interest in physical sciences. The main thing is that there's been problems that we've been struggling with for a very long time, and a lot of these tools are finally allowing us to make progress. And I think the talks today will give you a sense of how that works. I wanted to kind of point out, so there's people who have studied these problems and the growth of the interest. And there was a paper last year, which I thought was interesting. Let me see if this pointer works. Which showed that if you look at the percentage of papers involving AI, you just look at any paper written with artificial intelligence and machine learning in it, and the physical sciences in particular are having this sort of very large growth relative to the other fields. So a long time ago, most of the papers were just computer science papers, but in terms of the applications, the relative share of sciences in general and physical sciences in particular has been growing steadily over the last decade. And in general, the number of people interested in artificial intelligence in various forms has been growing exponentially as well, which is very exciting because the field is showing steady growth and doesn't show a sign of tapering yet. One interesting question is, what is the ultimate role of artificial intelligence and machine learning in physics? And one interesting thing to do is to compare the size of these current AI models to the size of things like mammalian brains. And so you can look at the evolution just as a rough proxy for how big these machines are. You say, well, you start with these programs like Elmo and BERT, which had 94 million parameters. Then the first ChatGPT or GPT-2 had 1.5 billion, then 175 billion for GPT-3. At GPT-4, well, we don't really know how big it is, but some estimates are around 170 trillion. Which interestingly is around the same number of synapses in the human brain. So roughly you can say, well, number of parameters, number of synapses, it roughly characterizes the size of this intelligence. So we're at this interesting intersection point where the size, just the absolute size of these networks is comparable to the size of human brains. And you can say, well, GPT-3 might have been the size of a cat brain. So the difference between GPT-3 and GPT-4 is roughly the difference of the intelligence of a cat and intelligence of a human. And anyone who's used these tools to any extent will appreciate the profound change in going to the next level of magnitude. And actually, if you extrapolate even farther, you look at the number of synapses of things like a mouse brain, and then you look for Homo erectus and chimpanzee and cat. And here, as on the x-axis, I've plotted the number of years which is basically the evolutionary time when each species diverged in the phylogenetic tree. And you see that there's actually a nice exponential growth here. So this is a log-log plot. So an exponential growth shows up as a straight line here. And you can compare the growth of mammalian intelligence to the growth of artificial intelligence. And they're both exponential curves, but they differ by a factor of 10 to the 6, a factor of 1,000,000 in the exponent, which is pretty crazy. So what that means is that a mammal will basically get twice as smart in 1,000,000 years, and a machine will get twice as smart in a year. And that difference, if you don't appreciate exponentials, you can maybe see it from this curve. It's impossible to plot both of these lines at the same time and see any structure. So you can either plot it this way, or you can zoom in and plot it here. And what's really, really interesting is these two curves, two lines intersect at a point, and that point where they intersect is now. Plus or minus 2 years. We're at this critical time where the size of machines is roughly comparable to the size of humans. And I think that's super exciting, and it's super exciting for all of artificial intelligence, but in particular to problems in the physical sciences. Now you can ask, can those exponential laws continue? So I showed you this plot of the number of papers. It's hard to imagine you can continue to have exponential growth of the number of papers, but you can say the same thing about Moore's law for the size of basically the number of transistors or computing power, which everybody says, oh, it can't continue to grow exponentially, but somehow or other it does. The same thing with like energy efficiency. This is another law called Kuhme's law, which also has sustained exponential growth over time. Now, you could say, well, it may not be that 100 years from now, machines will be 10 to the 100 times better than humans, but it's certainly not going to happen that this exponential growth is just going to stop. No one can imagine that GPT-4 is the limit of artificial intelligence, and that's the best language model we'll ever use. In fact, it's more likely to be the worst language model we'll ever use, right? And if you envision what's going to happen somehow, so maybe it'll be kind of slightly sub-exponential growth, but there's no way to deny that 10 years from now, these machines will be solving problems that we couldn't even conceive of, and they'll be orders of magnitude smarter than we are. So this is a very exciting future, and we need to be able to grasp this and figure out how to deal with these tools and adapt to this possible future. So let me just kind of summarize something about what's going on in the Boston area and some of the people here, just to give you some context for what's going on. So this is, I'm part of this institute called the NSF Institute for Artificial Intelligence and Fundamental Interactions. Lina, Necib, and Carlos, who just showed up, is also part of this institute. But more broadly, we have what are 40 PIs. So the first thing I want to address is what is a fundamental interaction. So I asked GPT what this is, because people may not know. And it said, first of all, it gave me like a 2-page answer, as it often does, which nobody wants to read. So then you have to ask it to give a 1-sentence answer so you can put it on a slide. And it said fundamental interactions, known as fundamental forces, are the 4 basic forces of the universe: gravitational, electromagnetic, strong, nuclear, and weak, governing different aspects of particle interactions. Well, that's not really what this institute is about, but broadly speaking, it's about questions that don't necessarily have applications. It's about cosmology and high-energy particle physics, neutrinos, quarks, gluons, trying to understand these things and using artificial intelligence for those goals. As I mentioned, we have a lot of people involved. It's a Boston area institution between MIT, Harvard, Northeastern, and Tufts. There's a lot going on, and we'll just give you a preview of some of those ideas today. The broad idea of what goes on in IAIFI is we do theoretical physics, astrophysics, experimental physics, and also foundational AI involving with some of our computer scientists. And then you get a feel of some of these ideas through the talks today. It's open. If people want to join, just send me an email, and I'll add you to the mailing list. We have seminars and colloquia and things like that, and an active. You can look at the website to see what's going on. There's another NSF AI Institute for Dynamic Systems, and you could ask the same question: what's a dynamic system? So a dynamic system is a mathematical model that describes the state of a system evolves over time due to interaction with the systems and its environment. So this is what Lina will talk about today. She'll tell you to what extent this is actually describes what goes on at this institute. This is a bit of a broader a collection of people that's not just centered in Boston, but there's a lot of stuff going on, and it just illustrates that there's so much excitement in the physical sciences in artificial intelligence. So here's some example of some of the things that they get involved in. So let me just conclude, and we'll move on to the main speakers. But really, data science in physics and astronomy and engineering is really growing exponentially fast. it's becoming a larger and larger fraction of all of the papers in AI are about the physical sciences. There's a huge concentration of talent working on this in the Boston area, some of which you'll hear about today. And there's really a lot of interesting problems that are fun because they require an expertise both in the science itself, in the physics or engineering or astronomy, as well as machine learning. So it draws people who are interested in the intersection of these two fields. So welcome to the workshop. I hope you'll have fun. I can take a couple of questions, but otherwise we'll just move on to the next talk.
Do you mind going back to this? Do you mind going back to the slide that has your email address and all that stuff?
Oh, for this? Yeah, just go to IAIFI.org, this website at the bottom, and oops, sorry. This thing down here, and there'll be links there to get in touch. Your question? Yeah.
Do you think the how much smarter the machine is correlated like one-to-one with how many parameters in the?
Not one-to-one, but it's a proxy for it. So you can different measures, but the exponential growth is undeniable. So maybe you're off by a factor of 10 or a factor of 100. No one would say a machine is as smart as a person, but in some levels they're much smarter. Right? There's some things it can do much better than any human, right? And much better memory than humans. So on some measures it's better at writing than most humans. Right? It's certainly better at mathematics and basic. I mean, it can do undergraduate level science better than the majority of people on the planet. So by some measures, of course, it can't walk. It can't, it doesn't have all those complicated things that the human brain does. But as just a proxy, as just some measure of things. So if you shift the prefactor of the exponential, it'll shift the line not noticeably because the scale is the exponent is in billions. So it doesn't really matter. The intersection point might change by 2 years, or 100 years, but it'll still intersect roughly now. Yeah.
So AI and machine learning can help us because we have lots of data. But they cannot explain what happened, especially for fundamental physics. But how to combine the AI and the physics to explain some scientific questions.
You mean they can't say what happens because they don't have data, or they can't say because they're not able to figure it out?
Cannot figure out what happened exactly. It must be for some fundamental physics.
But again, is the limitation that they don't have access to the data, or the limitation
Explain.
So given the same input that a human has, you think a human could explain it and the machine couldn't?
My question is, sorry, I didn't ask you very clearly. My understanding is that AI machine learning is based on lots of data, but for sometimes, especially to explain some fundamental physics questions,
yes,
we don't need some data. We just need a very clear.
Yeah. So I think that's even better for machines. The less data there is, the easier it is for a machine to do better than a human. Right? I mean, this is something that I do as a theoretical physicist. I struggle with equations and thinking about how to think about a question correctly and how to incorporate the right intellectual framework for even addressing those things. And that's exactly, if it's a pure thought, a machine is going to be much, much better than that. The things that humans can actually do now that machines can is gather data, right? But once machines are able to gather data, we can't do anything at all. But in terms of assimilating information, they're so much better at it than us already. I mean, really complicated things, right? They can't do graduate level physics, but they can do, electromagnetism and mechanics much better than the average human. So it's just a matter of time. All right, let me stop here and we'll go on to the main talks of the sequence, starting with Lina, and then again we'll have plenty of time to chat, and there will be a panel discussion where we can compare these different thoughts.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lina Necib. I'm an assistant professor at MIT and part of IAIFI, that you just heard of. And I work at the intersection of particle physics and theoretical astrophysics to try to understand basically how our galaxy formed and some implications for dark matter. So today's talk is going to be really focused on the basically the formation of the galaxy part. So let's hope the videos work. And nope, they don't. Oops. Oh, here we go. I can do this. Okay. I have like tons of videos. It's like my thing. Okay. Okay. Oh, QuickTime not available. Okay. Let me see. Okay. we're going to try to improvise. I have a lot of cool videos, so it is what it is. So basically, the first thing that I like to do here is kind of put everything in perspective. This video is supposed to tell you about how we're going to zoom out from the Earth and actually put our place in the galaxy. So you can have to imagine that as we're zooming out of the Earth, we're going to see the closest star to us, which is the sun. But then, as we're zooming out, we're going to see like a disk of the galaxy of the Milky Way.
If you want to try giving the talk off your own laptop?
That would be amazing, yes, because I have like 1,000 videos.
Fun to see a video.
I know, then just like have to describe it. I know. Okay.
Do you have HDMI or USB-C?
USB-C, yes. I also have my, I brought my dongle if that doesn't work.
You don't have HDMI?
Yeah, well, USB-C. Yeah, we need to change.
You can change the input.
The input, yeah. Oh, do we have the Zoom link?
I think it's, if you just copy and see the
Oh.
Should I get Kevin?
Yeah, I think now it's.
I don't have it.
I already did this. So.
They call you the magic Kevin.
Okay. No, but it doesn't let me go on Zoom because Zoom wants extra security for some reason. Okay, there we go. Okay, perfect. Now it's not. It's gonna stop complaining. All right. So -4. 0, 2, 1, password is 6942. Okay. Read on my own. There we go. And share the screen.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
It works now. Here we go. Yay. Thank you so much. You can see how many scientists does it take to have a video working. Okay, great. Yes, so let's go back to galaxies and how galaxies form. What I would like to do is, again, set us up into what actually happens. So that's where we are, and as we're zooming out, we're going to see the sun, the closest star, but there are actually so many more stars in our galaxy, and in particular, there are about 100 billion of them. So the kind of topic of my research is really how to use the kinematics and like these properties of these stars to figure out how our galaxy came to form. So as we're getting out of the disk of the Milky Way to just like see our galaxy from above, and it's going to look like this. So this is where we live. And in particular, we live at the edge of this galaxy. So the key thing that we need to understand today is that galaxies form hierarchically, which is really, really fancy words for galaxies form by eating other galaxies. So for example, this is one of our simulations that take about 25 million CPU hours to run, where we go about close to 13 billion years ago, and we just have are particles that we call stars and dark matter and a lot of things, and we just like let them evolve. And you can see here that this galaxy is actually forming by colliding through many other galaxies and kind of like absorbing them. So the Milky Way is no different. This is kind of like the theoretical picture of how galaxies form. What is interesting is to try to figure out the genealogy of it, like which mergers came into our galaxy to actually make this happen. So this is why what I like to kind of think about it as like a family tree or genealogy of it. So I have the Milky Way right here, and what I would like to do is actually fill it up to figure out like who are the parents, the grandparents, the cousins, like what are the other galaxies that actually ended up forming our galaxy and where we live today. So the way that I'm going to do this is that this is time. So this is more recent mergers, basically siblings, things that are coming in now, versus like the grandparents or the oldest mergers are going to be all the way on the top. So before we actually are able to dive into it, I wanted to kind of go through some definitions of the different stages of mergers that we're going to talk about. So first, we're going to have a merging galaxy, which means that we have a galaxy and we have another galaxy. I'm going to call that a merging galaxy because it's going to just hit us at some point. The second stage is what we call streams, which is basically as this, and I'll show you a video of it because that's what I do, as galaxies kind of come in through the gravitational potential of the Milky Way, they kind of start getting ripped and disrupted. And they form these beautiful structures in the sky. And then the last one is what we call debris flow, which is when things are just like a big, big mess that you can't really tell, but they still have some keen properties that we're going to discover. So let's talk about the merging galaxy. In the video that I just showed you, there was one, actually, that I'm not sure if you noticed. So let's kind of go back very quickly away from the sun, and you're going to see that there are actually one big galaxy and one small galaxy that's just falling into us right now. And in particular, they're right here. So that's the Large Magellanic Cloud, and this is the Small Magellanic Cloud, which is a satellite of the Large Magellanic Cloud. So this galaxy is what we call in a first infall, which means that it is just kind of really diving into us right now. It's not going to do anything in our lifetimes, because everything is of the order of a billion years in here. But it's interesting because we can already feel its effects when we're trying to model, properties of our galaxies, the motions of stars and everything. So because it still hasn't fallen yet, I'm going to put Magellan, or Large Magellanic Cloud, right here because it's very, very recent. Again, remember the goal is to fill up this tree. The Large Magellanic Cloud is not the only galaxy that we have. We've been discovering actually quite a few of them. These are about, I think, 25 that are certain, probably around 40. They're candidates of these satellite galaxies that are just orbiting around us right now, and they're helping us try to understand our galaxy. But yeah, so we have quite a few of these that are around our Milky Way right now. The next thing is this stage of a stellar stream. So a stellar stream is basically the fact that the gravitational potential of the Milky Way, so the middle part here is the Milky Way right here, and I can have like 1, 2, 3 objects. The fact is that there is a different kind of gravitational gradient between this side and this side. So as they're moving, they're not all going to move together. They're going to actually start getting disrupted. And in particular, you can see that happening here. So for example, if you look at the one on top, you can see that it actually forms like these, what we call like tidal arms. So basically you have like an array of stars ahead, and then one is trailing just like this. And this is how we know that they're actually getting disrupted. And it's giving us like this idea that indeed galaxies form by eating other galaxies. So this doesn't just happen in simulations and cool videos that I like to show to people. Indeed, we can actually see this in telescopes. So this is what we call the field of streams, and it is from the Sloan Digital Sky Survey, and it's a picture from 2007. We have updates to this since then. But basically, the colors of these stars are by distance. So you can see here that we have this GD1 stream, the Orphan stream, but especially this really, really thick one is the Sagittarius stream, which is coming from this Sagittarius dwarf galaxy that's just getting ripped apart by the Milky Way. So Some of these are actually what we call the globular clusters, which we're not going to have to worry about. But Sagittarius is indeed a dwarf galaxy, so it is indeed a galaxy that has formed outside the Milky Way and is now merging. So, which means that it actually does belong to our tree. Just a little bit kind of a history of Sagittarius is that it came in at about 8 billion years ago, and then it did like a first encounter here, and then did another lap, coming in again, and 1 billion years ago is the third passage. So right now we have this huge galaxy. This is ours, and then we have like these beautiful rays of stars that are all around us. So these you can actually see with a telescope, which is pretty cool. And I can guarantee you that stars don't just self-align for no reason like this. So this tells us that Sagittarius has come in a little bit earlier than the Large Magellanic Cloud because it's already on its third passage, so it belongs to this genealogy tree a little bit above. Now let's do debris flow. So debris flow is kind of like, it's the least visual thing that we can see, but I like to kind of compare it to long distance running. So this is actually the 400-meter race, a women race back in the London Olympics in 2012. And what I want you to see is that the athletes are actually kind of aligned right here in the beginning. So you can see them as a line. So you can think of that as the stellar stream. After a while, after a few laps, we will not be able to see actually this line, right? So as the video is progressing, and you can see them going, and then I accelerated just because in the middle part nobody cares. But at the end of the day, we can see like a group of people that are just, that have lost like that initial structure, but they're all coming in with some velocity and some velocity spread. So that's kind of the way that I think about debris flow. It's basically like a bunch of stars that, although you can't really see the physical structure, they have a very specific velocity and some spread to it, right? So that's what debris flow is. And this is allowed by the Gaia space mission. So in 2013, we actually, well, the European Space Agency has launched this Gaia Space Telescope, and it has since given us the positions and velocities of over 1 billion stars. Actually, the latest data release is 1.5 billion stars. To put this in perspective, the mission right before, which was Hipparchus, that ran from 89 to 93, had only about 100,000. So you can see where if you go from 100,000 to over 1 billion, basically your mathematical tools or analysis tools really have to keep up because you can't just stare at things anymore. The cool thing is that you could stare at things just one more time, because if you make a plot from the original data set, we found that there is evidence for this debris flow that is called Gaia Enceladus, and basically that there is this galaxy that has merged into our Milky Way about 6 to 10 billion years ago. Enceladus is a Greek godson of Gaia, so it's beautifully fitting. So again, you can see I'm obsessed with videos. Let me show you what happened when Gaia Enceladus came in. So this is Enceladus. It comes in, and you can see it disrupting the stars from the Milky Way, and then settling into this long kind of structure. And you can imagine that the sun lives about here. So actually all around us, there are these stars that we figured out because of Gaia that have very funky kind of velocities that people just like literally made plots, their initial plots, and were like, whoa, something stands out here. And indeed, it's because it dominates so much that this was somewhat of an easy discovery. Well, it's a great discovery, but still easier to find. So that is the Gaia Enceladus that has merged in quite a long time ago. So I went through these a little bit quickly, but basically the Large Magellanic Cloud, if you're in the southern hemisphere in a really dark night, you can literally see by eye. Like you look up in the sky and you can see it. It's incredible. We needed a little bit more progress to see Sagittarius. That's correct. So basically we needed something like the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. So we needed some telescopes and trying to understand kind of the distances and everything. And we could do this in 2007. So Gaia Enceladus, that's true. We could not have seen it coming until we had velocity measurements of these stars, which are very, very difficult to make. But now that we have this wonderful kind of Gaia space mission, that one was literally like You take your data and you plot it and you make a very simple cut and then it just screams at you. You can literally see it in your plot. That's true. You can't see it in the sky, but you can see it in the plot. So basically the way that I think about it is that we've kind of exhausted all the easy way out kind of parts of the Milky Way. And the question is, how can we find the rest? Things that are not obvious. The things you just can't just like squint a little bit and be like, I think there's something there. And this is where machine learning actually comes in. So basically what we want to do is automate the search and that identifies these stellar substructures, the things that stand out from, the stars that are born in the Milky Way. Like the sun, for example. The sun, a lot of people are doing a lot of detailed studies of the sun, but from my perspective, it's like very boring star because it was born in the Milky Way, didn't go very far, about 5 billion years ago, which is like literally yesterday in astrophysics. But what we want to know is stars that have merged somewhere else. So this is what I usually call immigrant stars, basically just like me. So stars that are born in a different galaxy and came in because they really tell us about the history of our galaxy. So in the remainder of the time, I'm going to go touch through 3 different ways that we've been doing this. One from supervised learning, and then unsupervised learning, and then anomaly detection. So different machine learning techniques to literally dive into this billions of stars in data and figure out exactly where these immigrant stars are. So let's start with the supervised learning. Basically, the trick is to really identify these mergers, you need to identify the stars that have different kinematic properties or chemical properties from the other ones. How to identify members of the Milky Way merger tree, you need to identify these immigrant stars. So I wanted like a little bit of a review, like a short review of stars in the Milky Way. This is the sun, by the way, not to scale, but just to tell us where we live. So first, there is the bulge. So the bulge of the galaxy, it has like a bunch of very old stars, and the way they move is like really around that bulge. They don't go very far, they're very old. It kind of formed with the very early parts of the Milky Way. Disk stars, like the sun, are just kind of in these mostly circular orbits. They actually go up and down a little bit, but they're very young, a few billion years old. And again, these are stars that are born in the Milky Way just more recently. The stars that we're looking for are what we call accreted stars. So these guys. These guys, because they came in from somewhere else, they're not bound to a disk, they're not bound to anything, so they can do whatever they want. Well, under the gravitational potential of the Milky Way. But basically, they have very different kinematic properties. They move very differently from the other stars. The only problem, though, is that around us, there are only about 1% of the stars close to us. So most of them is 99% of these disk stars that we, in this particular aspect, don't really care about. So it kind of puts us in a situation of needle in a haystack, and we're trying to find what these are. The way that we do this, and usually if I have time, I try to mess with people and try to get them to guess which one is simulation and which one is real. Astrophysicists can find it pretty easily, especially because this is the Large Magellanic Cloud. I usually hide it when I try to be a little bit sneakier. But basically what we do is, from the simulations that I showed you earlier, where galaxies actually merge, what we can produce is synthetic surveys, which means that answering the question, if Gaia lived in this simulated galaxy, what would it look like? And that's where we put our cells, and then we can generate images just like that. And we can use these tools to actually train code to distinguish stars that are accreted, so stars that are born somewhere else, versus the stars that are just really boring and part of the Milky Way. So basically what we do is train on simulations and then label the Gaia stars. So basically, we kind of have 2 labels. It's either a tracer star or an accreted star versus a disk star. And the information that we are taking in is the positions and the velocities. And some people probably have done a lot of convolutional neural networks. So they basically kind of like you throw this into a neural network, and it tries to kind of go through multiple hidden layers and then make some output about how to label these stars and learn some properties of the stars. But in simpler words, the way that I think about it is just like, this is a cat, this is a dog, figure out which one's which later. And what we could generate is actually a catalog of these stars that are these wonderful special stars. And we can just do these plots to try to figure out what's going on. So we don't have to dive really into the details of these plots, but basically, the first thing that you can kind of see here is that, so what I kind of did surrounded like in blue is that Gaia Enceladus, that big merger. It had to be there, otherwise I would have had a bug. The halo we knew, but the interesting thing that came out when we were doing this with my collaborators back in 2019 is that we did not know what this is, that purple thing on the top right. And the cool thing in astrophysics is that after a lot of anguish and 3 weeks of self-doubt and where did I go wrong and somebody must have seen this. Anyways, after all of that, you realize that, oh, you're the first person to actually see this, and then you get dibs on naming it. So this is Nyx, the Greek goddess of the night that I'm very proud of. So basically, it's a collection of stars that go very close to where the sun is, but they orbit a little bit differently. So for example, instead of turning like the sun around the disk, they actually kind of go in a little bit, and they are extended a little bit over the galaxy. So these are very interesting. And the cool thing is that we would not have been able to see it without these AI tools. So basically, because it was hidden literally under this mountain of background, and that's why this is so incredibly powerful. Some people say, well, maybe your AI thing is just learning something from the simulations and stuff. But then the reason that we know that this is true is because the AI part just really helped us identify these stars. After that, we just took just this collection of stars. We tried to study their kinematics, their orbits properly, and then we went to observe them with telescopes to try to figure out their chemical abundances. And they are indeed different. It's just that we would not have been able to see it without these tools. So the question still remains whether or not it's part of the Milky Way. And that's a long story that maybe someday we'll talk about. But basically, whether or not it was stars that are born in the Milky Way but got a kick that kind of changed their orbits, or is it something that's coming out of somewhere else? So that's why I leave the question mark in there. We can go a little bit deeper, looking at clustering. So if you don't trust simulations, something that you can do is just take the data very agnostically, don't look at any simulations, and say, okay, can I put like basically an algorithm that just separates things into groups and then tells me which group is which? So clustering is basically just grouping, right? Grouping by a certain property. The cool thing is that our brains are actually really, really good at grouping things. The only problem is that we're only good at grouping things in 2 dimensions. So for example, if I show you this, you can already say, oh, this is one thing, this is another thing, there is here, this is a bump, something, and then they're like just scattered of things that just don't belong really anywhere. So the trick about clustering algorithms is that you really need to pick the right algorithm for your data set. And the example here is, for example, if you pick something that is something like k-means, you can see that with the colors that you're like, wait, my brain would not have put it that way, right? Because why is that brown thing related to that line? That doesn't really make sense. And then, again, there are some very detailed studies to figure out exactly what works with your data. But in particular for us, in this particular context, something called HGB scan clustering or hierarchical clustering actually works best. And it kind of does reproduce exactly what your brain does. The reason that we need to do this is because we are going to move from 2D, right? You can just stare at it. So HGB scan, it was great for us because it allowed for different sizes, it allowed for noise, arbitrary shapes, and densities. And we're not the first ones, obviously, to use this algorithm, because it has been known in computer science for a long time. What we wanted to do is use it to cluster our Gaia data. However, the problem that shows up in physics and does not show up in computer science is measurement uncertainties. So our data points have error bars. That's honestly the essence of physical sciences. And this is kind of where the difficulty is. So we can't, that's why I think the conversation between physicists or astrophysicists and AI expert is so critical, because we can't just like use off-the-shelf things and just apply them to our data just because we have some other constraints that are not really, that are not as common in computer science, and in particular measurement errors. So what we wanted to do is use this for measurement uncertainties. So basically what we ended up doing is cluster the first data, shake everything basically based on their measurement uncertainties, cluster it again over and over and over, and the subset that we ended up with is the most stable clusters. So what are the clusters that will always show up no matter how much you shake it? You shake your data within their measurement uncertainties. So this is possibly incomplete, but kind of at least a step in that right direction of trying to incorporate these uncertainties. And finally, and I'll talk a little bit faster, what we can do is look for a stream finder. So I was talking about streams earlier, like they're beautiful things in the sky. The fainter ones are harder to see, right? So what we can do, and basically a goal to understand like the properties of the Milky Way, is to really increase statistics of these stellar streams. And to find them, what we need to do, what has been done, honestly, until very, very recently, is literally just like getting your data, making some cuts, staring, okay, maybe this is something, running their orbits and trying to do it. So it's very kind of like, it's a very sluggish process. So what my collaborators and I actually tried to do is build an anomaly detector, which is kind of takes kind of like the distributions in multiple dimensions and try to kind of extrapolate the background. And if anything stands out, that's what kind of like it says, ooh, there's something here. And then we added some properties to it, which is basically trying to make sure that it's a linear structure, just like that one. And the interesting thing is that early last year, we have about 102 new stream candidates. And we ran this on simulations to figure out like a false positivity rate. So we think that 90 of them are expected to be real. It's just that now we have to actually follow up on them one by one and figure out exactly what's going on. So what I would like to actually kind of end with here is that there is a limit to what humans can do, in particular in this wake of giant data. And AI is really the tool to do it. It's just that we have to be very careful to make sure that it takes into account the properties of the data that we have, and in particular, measurement uncertainties and also the symmetries of the problem. So, for example, like we know that physics respects symmetry. Like if I turn the galaxy around, it should actually kind of give me the same results, etc. So, yeah, on that note, I'm going to leave you with Nyx. This is the Greek goddess of the night coming out of the Milky Way. Thank you. Yes.
Well, first of all, that's a great talk, and I'm really happy that we're able to have your laptop.
I know, the videos, right? Would have been very boring otherwise.
So actually, this is just a comment, fascinating. When you are talking about clustering,
Yeah.
with error-prone measurements, I don't know if you're aware, but there is the entire field of bioinformatics and also in public health, where what they do in bioinformatics is try to do three-dimensional approaches for clustering gene expression where the measurements are affected by error.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's, and in terms also of the scalability of the problem,
Right.
it's very similar. And so that's made me think about that there is actually a point of connection in data science. So I don't know if you know Raphael Irizarry as one of the name, but you know, there is so much work in trying to figure out, I'm not saying they've solved the problem, but I'm saying that there is an interest, you know, tremendous interest in data science to identify clustering techniques with massive amount of information.
Right.
Then there is measurement error. And with genes, it's a classic example because it's the same scale in terms of dimensionality. And when you are thinking about, do you want to cluster genes so they are co-regulated?
Right.
And the regulation and their gene expression is measured with that. So just want to point it out that could be an interesting place.
I'm gonna find you in the break because I do want to actually read those
I can
papers.
give you some, some of the people, but that's exactly what data science is about, is trying to bring, data science problem with people
Exactly.
that, try to face the same challenges.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
Yeah. Thank you. That's right. Hi.
Enjoying that discussion because I agree with Francesca.
Yes.
We have plenty to talk about. But I have a question that's for you and Matt. Okay. So Matt, you just heard Lina say that she has to follow up on 90 something, whatever, candidates. So do you both think that this amazingly creative, wonderful AI of 2 years from now is going to do that for her?
Oh, those 90. No, unfortunately, no, because some of them we have to actually write observing proposals and we have to send somebody to the telescope to actually watch
So
it.
are we going to have AI observing proposals?
Observe-
AI decisions on the observing
AI
proposals?
writing
they can write the observing proposals. That's right.
experiments, building telescopes, not
Yeah.
50 years from now, definitely.
Yeah.
Right, so, but I mean,
this is
really good
a great
serious
topic for
questions.
discussion for the panel.
Yeah, it is.
So maybe we take one more question for Lina and move on.
It seems that the underlying theme here is the extent to which AI is qualitatively changing astrophysics and then other physical sciences. Could you comment a little bit on the extent to which astrophysics has fundamentally changed? That is to say, are researchers disadvantaged by not using it? Namely, you've discovered things that typical methods have never found before.
Right.
So is it necessary, in fact, to use AI in order to be, let's say, competitive and extend knowledge of astrophysics?
I think for this particular field that relies so much on analyzing data, absolutely. I think it's definitely a very, very strong advantage to be able to do this. I would not say that AI is going to replace humans, though, because you still need that field expertise to kind of distinguish from
Sure.
what's just nonsense versus something that is real, and you have to follow up on it, and you have to really understand kind of like the theoretical background that's still done by humans. But I think definitely for astrophysics, or at least especially because the field of astrophysics has an explosion of data, especially this decade, right? From the Gaia space mission, JWST, that kind of came online a couple of years ago now, and Euclid that came online like a few months ago, and then we have like a few actual space missions that are gonna come online like in the next couple of years. I think the Rubin Observatory should be on either later this year or early next year, where it's gonna have it's like terabytes of data a night, where it's just at that point there is no way you can kind of get around it. So for that area of astrophysics, it's absolutely critical. There's
For this talk. So my research is trying to understand these two questions. One of which is, how does the universe look in neutrinos? And I will tell you briefly what neutrinos are. And we have multiple ways into which we can observe our universe, as you heard in the previous talks. And I show this in these sort of stained glass images. So you can see the universe in light from like ground-based telescopes or satellites. We can also see or observe our universe through the study of gravitational waves, which are deformations of space-time, such as done by the LIGO collaboration in the US. And then we have another way of looking at the universe, which would be actually with neutrinos, and I will tell you what that is. I must say that I'm not an astronomer, I'm not an astrophysicist, I'm actually a particle physicist. I use neutrinos as a beam to study these particles. So my biggest interest is to understanding the behavior of these hidden neutrinos. But to do that, we actually have to find them and look for them coming from. I like to show this image because this is essentially one of the best images we have of an astrophysical source in neutrinos. This is actually a picture of our own sun in neutrinos taken by the Super Kamiokande experiment almost 20 years ago. It's a very blurry image, in fact. And the objective of this talk is to tell you first about neutrinos, then how do we find these neutrinos that come from these high energy sources, and then I want to tell you what are the recent advancements that we have done in this field through the use of machine learning. So the first thing I want to say is that there are 3 neutrinos, and they're all very light. The lightest neutrino, or the heaviest neutrino, let's say, it's no more than 1 million times the mass of the electron. So these are the lightest massive particles that we have in the standard model. Neutrinos are produced in multiple ways. They can be produced through natural mediums, and they can also be produced through anthropogenic means. As I was showing you earlier, the sun, through its nuclear reactions, emits a lot of neutrinos. So that's one very bright neutrino source that we have to our usage. Neutrinos can also be produced in the collision of high energy particles, known as cosmic rays, with the Earth's atmosphere. Those are going to be known sometimes as cosmic atmospheric neutrinos, or sorry, atmospheric neutrinos, since they are produced in the Earth's atmosphere. There are going to be neutrinos that are relevant or remnant from the Big Bang. These actually have never been observed, and it's a major area of research. So these are the analogs of the CMB, but in neutrinos. What I'm going to be interested on are neutrinos that are going to be produced from astrophysical objects, for example, after a supernova explosion, or nearby black holes. And finally, we can also make neutrinos at Earth through anthropogenic means, and that can be done in accelerators, so the Fermilab accelerator near Chicago, or they're produced copiously in reactors, nuclear reactors. Okay, so one thing I want you to know, and this is actually quite important for this talk, is that neutrinos do not like to talk to matter. They are the shy particles on the standard model. They do not like to interact with materials. And so in particle physics, we like to talk about the interactions of two particles by something known as the cross-section. And the important thing is that this is proportional to the likelihood that a particle interacts with matter. So a typical proton-proton collision compared to a neutrino-proton collision is more than 20 orders of magnitude less interacting. And so what that means in practice is that if I have a neutrino and I throw it at the planet, it will just go through the planet. And in fact, it can go easily more than 200 Hertz before it interacts. So that's going to be a blessing and a curse, as you will see in a minute. So what is the problem? That's the particle physics problem that we are trying to address. So we know for more than 100 years that cosmic rays get to the Earth, but we actually don't know where most of these cosmic rays, or the highest energy cosmic rays, are produced. And cosmic rays actually span a wide range of energy, several decades in energy, and several decades in magnitudes. And the question is, what is making these extremely high energy particles that we see from outer space? So the highest energy cosmic ray actually have 300, so 3 × 10⁹ TeV of energy, where a TeV is 1,000 times the mass of a proton at rest. So it's an extremely high energetic particle. And if we were to use conventional means to accelerate particles like the ones used in the LHC, you will need to build an accelerator that has roughly the circumference of Mercury. So how are these particles produced in space? And this is where the particle physics enters. So this is how we produce neutrinos at Earth and heaven. So we have some kind of accelerator. At Earth, it will be just electric fields and magnets accelerating protons. That is going to hit a target, which is going to allow interactions of protons with this target. And then out of that, you're going to get an array of particles. Often these targets are going to be in the presence of magnetic fields, so charged particles will deflect of the main direction, whereas neutral particles will keep going on the target. So we think that something similar happens in astrophysical objects. Particles are accelerated, perhaps by a supermassive black hole, and they could interact, for example, with nearby gas or radiation around the black hole, producing an array of particles, some of which will get deflected by magnetic fields, and others will go through. And what matters is that when a proton hits a photon in this environment, it produces an unstable particle known as a pion. This pion makes neutrinos, and it also produces neutral pion, which actually makes gamma rays. And so you say, well, we just use these gamma rays to look at the sources. So here's a cartoon of one of these objects. The problem is, well, you cannot look at the protons because the protons are deflected by magnetic fields before they get to us, so you cannot actually figure out the direction of this object by looking at the proton. High energy photons actually are also not going to be good to point to these objects, and the reason is that a very high energy photon has a chance to interact with the CMB on its way to the Earth, making electrons and cascading down to lower energies. That's when neutrino enters. And another way to think about is how deep we can see in the universe. So here is energy of the probe that I'm using to look at the universe, and this is the distance from Earth, say how deep you're looking at. So you can look at the universe, of course, microwaves, optical X-ray, gamma rays, and then this black area here is the region where light gets absorbed before it reaches us. So this area here at highest energies and longest baselines can only be revealed by neutrinos or extremely high energy cosmos. Okay, so that's the problem we have. So perhaps neutrinos may be the perfect messengers to find these objects, and if we find them, we could do interesting physics with it. And the nice part about it is they're electrically neutral, so they do not get deflected by magnetic fields. They're massless, so they come at time with the photons, or approximately massless. They're essentially unabsorbed, so they cannot be stopped by anything. They're going to tell us how much nuclear activity happens in these objects, and maybe reveals the origin of cosmic rays. The difficult part is that they are very, very difficult to detect. And so here enters the Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory. If you were to go to the South Pole, you will see this building, and this building will appear a bunch of times. But that's actually not the main part of our experiment. Our experiment, which is, by the way, very close to geographic South Pole in Antarctica, which, by the way, this is one of the students I worked with when I was a postdoc, went there. This is the geographic South Pole marker, more or less correctly oriented with respect to us. The experiment is actually buried in the Antarctic ice. So Antarctica has a big glacier. The glacier is about 2.5 kilometers tall. And what we have done is we have drilled these holes, 2.5 kilometers deep. And about 1.5 kilometers in, we have deployed an array of light sensors. And these light sensors are organized in a grid. And this grid covers approximately 1 cubic kilometer of very clear Antarctic ice. This is one of the most transparent mediums, naturally occurring mediums that we have on the planet. The sensors are arranged in what we call strings, and the strings are separated horizontally about 150 meters, and they are separated within a string. We have a bunch of sensors which are separated about 20 meters. And so, just to give you a sense of scale, if I had LED light, a photon source, and I would shine it deep in this ice, it can go more than 2 blocks without being absorbed by the medium. So it's extremely clear medium. Imagine that you have a pool, right, of water, and you will be able to see it 2 kilometers deep. That's why you're looking into this. Of course, when you are 2.5 kilometers deep in the ice, and you open your eyes here, everything is just pitch black. Okay. So our detector is made of a series of photomultiplier tubes. And so what are these elements? They're essentially inverse light bulbs. They can convert light into current. So we're able to see the light produced by particles made of neutrino interactions. And again, they're arranged in this grid. So how do we see neutrinos? So neutrinos coming along. It hits somewhere in the ice or the rock below the detector. And it makes a charged particle. And this charged particle is going to be a high energy charged particle. And when you have a charged particle that goes faster than the speed of light in the medium, it makes the equivalent of a sonic boom but in light. So it emits this characteristic light emission that has this V shape known as Cherenkov radiation. And so by looking at the time of arrival of the Cherenkov light in each of our individual sensors, we're able to figure out the direction of these events. So this is analogous to this duck moving faster than the water in this medium. So this is a simulation of one of a high energy muon. A muon is the heavier cousin of an electron going through the ice. And if you look very carefully, there are some vertical lines. Those are our strings. Remember, the separation of those lines is about 100 meters. And here the color is going to mean time, and that's going to be constant through my talk. We're always going to represent time in our figures through the color. And each of these hertz that you see here is an individual photon. And you will see that these photons are are emitted originally in a cone-like shape. You see this cone in the beginning? That is the Cherenkov cone. But then there is actually lots of bubbles and dust present in this ice. So that those actually not going to absorb necessarily light, but they're actually going to scatter the light. And so what you're seeing here is photons that can go several hundreds of meters, but their trajectories are no longer linear. And so one of the big problems we have in IceCube is that we have to understand the properties of this Antarctic ice to be able to infer the directions of these particles. So essentially, we're going to observe some of these photons arriving in our photosensors, and we have to undo what the ice have done to that light to infer the direction of these particles. A typical event like this high-energy event can have billions of photons produced, and so we have to track them down in our simulation for every time we want to resimulate an event. That is a very expensive endeavor, and actually we did one of the largest, or maybe the largest, simultaneous cloud computing use of GPU. So we used 50,000 cloud GPUs simultaneously to simulate a large batch of our neutrino events. And this was an effort together with people at Amazon and NVIDIA. And the reason is that you are tracking these photons over this large cubic kilometer volume. So it's computationally extremely expensive to reconstruct and simulate these events. How do the events actually look? So those photons that you saw, they eventually hit our sensors. And again here, the color indicates time. So red is earlier times and blue is later times. So this is a neutrino that made a muon that's going upwards in this image. And then we represent the amount of light that is deposited in an individual detector by the size of this sphere. So there's lots of light deposited here and little light in these small hits here. So this is a good representation of our data. Essentially what we have here is a three-dimensional image or a three-dimensional object where we have at every time and every point a light deposition. And what we have to do is we have to figure out what's the direction of this object. So this doesn't make any justice to these events, but I want to compare it to the exercise. This is how our events look in comparison to, for example, Boston Commons. So when I show you one of these displays, this is more or less the magnitude that we're talking about over here. So this is a large, so these muons actually can go several kilometers easily. Okay, so that's the data. And what's the problem? Well, neutrinos are very rare, and there's lots of backgrounds. And so this is a simulations of 10 milliseconds of IceCube data on Monte Carlo. So it's going to play it. So this is what you will see in our detector. So more or less, we see 3,000 muons produced in the atmosphere, not from neutrinos, per second. So that's 10 to the 11 per year. We see one neutrino from the atmosphere every 6 minutes. That's more reasonably interesting. But then we only see about 100 astrophysical neutrinos per year. Right? That means that your signal to background ratio is a factor of 10 to the 9 you have to reduce. Okay? So you have to find these neutrinos in this cloud, and then for everyone you have to reconstruct its direction and see where it's coming from. That is our challenge. Okay. So in neutrino astrophysics, we have talked about two types of events. I've shown you pictures of these ones. These are made by muon-type neutrinos that produce these high-energy muons. We call these track events because they made these long trajectories within our detectors. And those have very, depends who you ask. If just an astronomer tell you this is very bad, but in terms of particles physics, this is reasonable. So the angular resolution of this event is better than a degree. Can get to as good as maybe 0.2 degrees. And the end resolution is going to be very poor because most of the time the event is not going to be contained within our detector. So measuring the end of these events is quite bad in terms of resolution, about a factor of 2. Then we have these other events that look like blobs. These blobs are produced by neutrinos that are not of the muon type. It's not relevant for this talk what those neutrinos are, but essentially neutrinos can make this morphology or this morphology of light. And on this one, it's much difficult to figure out the direction. We can do about 10 degrees for 100 TeVs, but we can measure the energy deposited very well calorimetrically, so about 10% energy resolution in those. So if I tell you, well, you want to find objects in space, what would you do? Well, what you would do is you probably pick this event here, because this actually points in some direction, where the other ones just point essentially very broadly. So that's what we did. So we used these events. So there was a very interesting event in 2017 it was almost 100 TeV neutrino. This is the event display, so it went this direction. And this actually was a very well reconstructed event with a sub-degree resolution. And we were very lucky because this, when we saw this event, then this was seen in coincidence by Gamma Ray Observatory that saw that a blazar close to the region of our event started flaring. So that was a time coincidence, so we got lucky. And that allows us to find the first astrophysical neutrino source, which is coming from this object, TXX0506 plus 056, which we published in Science some years ago. And this was found essentially by coincidence of one of our events with gamma rays at the same time. Okay, so that requires you to get lucky and have a coincidence in time with other observatories, but that hasn't happened only actually once for us. So the other thing you can do is you can just look at the sky and look at those track events and see if they cluster at any point in the sky. So this is a clustering problem. So here what you see is a significance map where what we do have is a statistics that quantifies how much coincidence is between individual events in our sky. And so one problem of this method is that you have a very large trial factor essentially because you're looking for clustering at every point in the skies, being there approximately 40,000 square degrees in the sky. That's more or less 40,000 trial factor that you're paying here. However, if you look long enough and you have good enough resolution, things start popping up in this map. And there is actually one hotspot here, which is the most significant source that we see. That happens to be NGC 1068, which is also an AGN. This is how we see it in our data. So in this case, we see multiple events from this object, approximately 70 associated to this source. And you can see how, for example, they stick up over background. So that's what we found with essentially traditional techniques. One thing that's interesting about NGC 1068 is that in the linear range that we see in NGC 1068, the emission of neutrinos is much higher than gamma rays. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about how we use machine learning. So I was telling you, like, okay, you would take these track events and they would point, and that's what we did, and we found two sources, one by gamma ray coincidence and one by clustering. And so somebody said, is it possible that maybe we could use these events here, the 10-degree angular resolution, to find sources? And initially, this person was told the answer is no. And by my colleague, Naoko Kurayoshi-Nason, was very driven, or is very driven, actually. And then she thought, well, one thing that you could try doing is try to look for extended objects. Maybe you cannot get this resolution to be 1%, but maybe you can make it like 5% or 4%. And that's neat because there are some extended objects in space that you can look for. In particular, the plane of our galaxy is that order of magnitude. So if we could get this number from more than 10 to order a few degrees, we could perhaps see our own galaxy. So that's the idea. So how are these events reconstructed? How do we infer the direction of those cascades? There is not this, you don't see this long lever arm. So what you have to do is, what this shows you is one of those cascade events, and every little figure here is the time series of light that you see at every given photosensors. And so what we do is we do a likelihood fit, where we fit every given direction, or for every given direction that we assume, we predict the number of photons that you would see in every individual sensors, and then we do a fit. But this is extremely expensive, because as I was telling you earlier, a high-energy event produces billions of photons, and if you want to do it for every single assumption, this is where you need those 5,000 GPUs that I was telling you earlier. So this is how we do it traditionally. So if you do such a thing, well, you get this significance map. This is our galaxy, by the way, the water location of our galaxy. And this is a significance map, so blue or more red is more significant clustering. So there is nothing really connecting to the galaxy in this particular image. So then what we did is we replaced the reconstruction with a CNN, with a very standard CNN, and that actually improved it from this to this. So now you can start seeing here how some of these events start sort of going around the plane. And actually, when you look at the correlation, that gets you to p-values. This is this fit, about 0.3 p-values, so no correlations. This gets you to about now order 1% p-value. So you're starting to get in the right direction. So this told us that we need to move from traditional methods to machine learning methods. Another thing that's interesting is that machine learning can be applied very fast or very rarely in our events. So training your model can be very expensive, but doing the forward pass on the data is very fast, which means that you can apply to earlier levels of your event selection. So typically in particle physics events, you start with simpler criterion and then more sophisticated criterion to select your data as your data rate decreases. And so by using the machine learning-based event selection, we're actually able to improve our selection efficiency significantly for cascades. So this blue here is a traditional straight cut-based event selection for cascade searches, and this one here is one that actually uses this machine learning reconstruction at earlier levels. And so we're able to increase the statistics by a factor of 10. We also improve our CNN that I was talking to you earlier. And so how our CNN works is the ice cube array is an approximately hexagonal grid. However, it's not a uniform grid because we could not deploy uniformly these detectors in the ice. There are actually places where there are old leftover from old Antarctic missions that you cannot drill over. So the grid is not exactly hexagonal, but it's approximately hexagonal. So what we did is we have actually a subarray, I'm not going to talk about it, but our main array is hexagonal. So what we did is we just sort of squish it into a rectangle, and then we just zero padded it on the sides to make it fit. Then what we did is essentially this became three-dimensional CNN, where our convolutions actually were not regular square convolutions, but essentially hexagonal convolutions. So when we did this, actually we got quite better performance. So here you can see this blue is the CNN performance on cascade reconstructions, and this gray is the likelihood-based reconstructions. So you can see that the likelihood sort of stays flat as a function of energy, but the CNN definitely starts kicking in and getting better to the traditional reconstruction somewhere around tens of TeVs. So now you are no longer only faster than the traditional likelihood-based reconstructions, but you're also have improved the resolution significantly. Okay. So that gave us now these final results. So these top figures were very famous images of our galaxy, I believe in optical and gamma rays. So what you can do is these gamma rays here, some of these gamma rays are expected to be produced from the case of these neutral pions, which again are produced in these collisions. And so this is the expected template of gamma rays from this pi0 background from this figure here. This is now smeared out by our resolution. So our typical resolution for cascade with this CNN algorithm is about the size of this circle here. So you apply this size of smearing to this over here, and you end up with this prediction for what we should see in our detector. And this is actually what we see in real life. So this is our first very, very blurry image of the galaxy. However, it's the first time we see it in neutrinos, and now we have gone, remember we were like p-value of 0.3, p-value of 2%, now we go to almost 5 sigma by using these techniques. So this is our, only possible essentially with this machine learning techniques here. Okay, so that's what's been going on in IceCube, and I want to show you some recent work by my group, which may be of interest. So one thing that you should note is that this experiment is in Antarctica, and this building that I showed you in the beginning actually contains a bunch of computers. And these computers are doing the first level of processing on our data. Our data actually comes from the cables through these stands here and gets to our computer center. So first level of processing happens in the pole, and then the most interesting data set is shipped through satellite to the northern hemisphere, where we do very complicated analysis on that. Now, when I tell my admin or system coordinator combinators, like, okay, it would be nice if we could have some GPUs here in this station, they immediately get very concerned because power in the South Pole is very expensive. The station is, part of it is fueled by jet fuel and also some solar powers, right? So if you want to bring a couple of say A100 cards, that is not going to happen here. So there's a problem that you have to be fast in making decisions because you want to inform our experiments, and you are working in a resource-constrained environment. So let's see if we can tackle those problems. So one thing that we did with my students, Felix, you, and Jeffrey, is we decided to change the way we are doing our convolutions from traditional convolutional neural networks to something known as a sparse convolutional neural networks. So if you remember those images I was showing you earlier of those events, most of the detector is actually not touched by the light. Only a small fraction of the array is actually observing light at a given time. And so in a normal convolution, you have your data. Let's say that these lighter blocks are detectors hit by light, and you have your convolutional kernel, and you go at every block and do your convolution, and that gives you this sort of post-convolutional array. In this subsparse manifold convolution, you only apply the convolution on the dots that actually have data on those. And that way, you can preserve essentially your number of operations to the number of hits in the detector. And because your number of convolutions is significantly reduced, that allows you to speed up this process. And so what I show you in this figure here are 3 different neutrino experiments. This is under construction, and this one is ice cube. And these histograms tells you the trigger rates at the detector. So this is the number of events that we see at a given per unit seconds. So about a few kilohertz is the rate. So that's the speed that you need to be able to make decisions at the pole. This is a likelihood method, so that means if you do a traditional fit, this is the speed roughly of a CNN, and this is how these parser manifolds can do. So about 10 times improvement in speed. The other problem that we had is the issue of resource. So with my student Andy Jean, we started thinking about low power reconstructions. So GPUs are great, but they're expensive and they're very power hungry. So the idea is if we could use something known as edge computing to try to make these faster decision makings. And so potential applications of this technology, it could be real-time reconstructions in resource limiters environments such as the South Pole, but you could also think about like maybe balloon flights or other places where you have much resources. And this you can find in this recent paper here. So how much power is low power? So I have a bunch of computing technologies here. So this is the A100 GPUs. This is a gaming computer. There's a MacBook. And this is a Google Edge CPU, which is what we want to base on this project. And this is the report efficiency. So notice that these are in teraflops. So it's a float-prone operations, and these are just integer operations for this device here. And this is the total power consumed by the device plus the server. And this is the accelerator, so this GPU-only power or TPU-only power. So we're talking about like, research class grade GPU, order 400 watts, and this is order 2 watts to use. Of course, now you went from this many float operations to this many integer operations. So the compromise is, well, if you use this, you have only integer operations. That's not good. And you can only do 2D convolutions with current hardware, but you have $50 per unit and 2 watts per unit. So that's maybe advantageous. And how we did this is we had to rethink how we do reconstructions within IceCube. Let's look at this again. So this is our IceCube event. The event comes in, and it's measuring of lights, and you see these hits in our detector. So we thought, well, this looks like a movie. Why don't we convert this into essentially a movie-like problem? So that's what we did. So what we have to do is we have to frame our data. So how will this, I want to explain this like pictorically. So imagine that you're seeing a movie, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, so on and so forth. This is my data points, my frames in my movie. In this case, it's going to be images of my event. And so what you want to do is you want to have some kind of summary or latent space encoding for each of these moments. So that will be in human language. Maybe this happens, this happens, this happens, and then this happens. Okay? That will be my encoded information. And in the end, you ask the computer, what is the movie about? And it tells you it's about this. So that's what we want to do for our events. We want to slice them into shots and then pass that to an AI that we can ask this question about. And so that's what we have done here. This is our network. So essentially, the IceCube event is sliced into time slices, which are a handful of nanoseconds per time slice. And then each time slice is then encoded via CNN encoder, uses a bunch of 2D convolutions to essentially an embedded space. And then that goes to an LSTM cell, and in the end you get out a prediction of the direction of the okay? So that's how we bypass the constraints of for the convolutions and whatnot that you will normally need to do in this sort of problem. So this is the most interesting plot in these slides. So this shows you the inference per watt. So higher in these darker columns is better. And this shows you the total power usage for different technologies. And so, for example, if you have a 100, you're talking about, I cannot read the number, but 1,000 watts usage, and about inference is of the level of 10 to the minus 2 inference per watt. And if you're talking about the Google TPU chip, you're talking about 10 to the 7 inferences per watt use, right? So in terms of like power per inference, this is actually much more efficient. The question is, of course, you have done compromises here. Can you get something that's reasonable? And the answer is reasonably yes. So this is for our ice-like detector. These are what we can do in our TPU. And this is the SSCNN network I was showing you earlier, which is pretty comparable, actually. Okay, so I just want to say that this is just an example of one neutrino telescope, but there are actually many under plan and under constructions. In particular, IceCube is going to be upgraded with a new sub-detector, which we'll install in a couple of years, which will have more data. And this is how it will look. So this is our current detector. So we're going to install more strings. So that means that your resolution spatially will be much better, especially at lower energies. And then in the next 10 years, we hope to enlarge our array currently in this footprint to a 10 times larger footprint in a project called IceCube Gen 2. And with that, I just want to finish telling you that we have found the first astrophysical sources, and we have recently observed the galaxy neutrinos, thanks for the improvements through machine learning. The images of the sky neutrinos are very blurry, an incomplete picture, but detection of high significant sources in the galaxy is only possible through machine learning algorithms, and I think there's going to be great opportunities for the future in this field. So thank you so much for your attention.
Time for a couple of questions for Carlos, and then.
Yeah.
So one question. For the low power reconstruction, when you replace the multi-dimensional convolutions with the 10 two-dimensional ones and the LSTM cell, how did your team kind of come up with that architecture? Was it just trial and error, just like throwing stuff together?
It was, I mean, I think we first realized that we could convert it into sort of like, we were thinking about it like a time series sort of analysis, okay, because we saw the data coming in time as a sequence. So this was the first thing that we had to change, because normally we'll do like essentially 3 convolutions, and essentially 4 convolutions because it's time and 3 dimensions on space. So we first said, okay, let's just do it sequentially in time. So this was the first thing. And then there was the problem of, okay, so now we have figured this out. How do we do this? This was actually more like trial and error. That's right. Yes.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions for Carlos?
I guess, could you also just go over again, like how we got the hexagonal convolutions?
Yeah, that's maybe, I mean, I think that the idea was that the detector original shape has a hexagonal symmetry. So we wanted to preserve that when doing the convolutions in this sort of orthogonalized grid. And so the idea was, I am going to orthogonalize my grid and then do still convolutions with little hexagonal patches here as a compromise from like having distorted it. I want to say that we now are changing this completely. I don't have slides on this, but essentially what my group is doing right now is changing this to a graph neural network. And in a, in a GNN, you can actually just have arbitrary locations for your nodes, and you're not restricted to a given geometry. So we are replacing this for a better technology. But this is what we did originally. Thank you for your questions.
So we already had some questions to the speakers. I thought we could start. I think a theme that's coming up is kind of what is the ultimate power of these tools in the physical sciences. And I was hoping that our panelists might sort of respond to what their vision is of how AI will continue to affect their field in the next 5 to 10 years, but also more broadly, like 50 years, What do you see it really being able to do? Well, even 100 years, if you could think that far, it's very hard, but maybe. We'll start. Maybe we'll start on the end with Lina.
Sure. So I think in terms of astrophysics, definitely there is an explosion of data over this basically the 2020s until the 2030s, and to be able to actually get the results that we need from all of these telescopes and missions, we really need to keep up with machine learning. As I was talking about earlier, it's just that there are still properties of our data that kind of are somewhat, I guess, not just domain specific, but just non-CS. So basically like uncertainties, scalability of the data, as well as like the symmetries of the problem, kind of the theoretical, and the interpretability. So basically these four things are like really the most important things, at least for me, in terms of using the machine learning. And there have been some research, of course, across all of these four domains, but these are kind of, whatever we develop has to kind of take these into account. The field of AI is kind of exploding. So it's, yeah, so I think at the end of the day, in a couple of years, I think everybody's going to be using it, at least like in my field for sure. And I think it's just going to be about keeping up and learning from other fields, learning from computer scientists, and yeah, and kind of it's going to look the field's going to look very different.
So, sorry, I'm curious about the data. Who controls the data and how is it shared? Because it's a lot of data and different people are collecting it.
Oh yes, but the good thing about astronomy, which is a little bit different, is that most data is public. And in public data releases, basically. So the people who make the experiments have some timeline, and then they release the data to everybody in the community, really.
So when you're doing your analytics, are you making a copy of the data and then running it on that, or?
That's right. Yes.
So everyone's making many data sets of.
Well, you can just copy the things that you need with SQL, for example. Like, so it's not just like giant sitting there, but there is like a big repository that people kind of take whatever they need from it. Yeah.
Thanks. Melissa, what do you think? What's your vision? Maybe 50 years? What do you
well,
think?
I mean, I have two different thoughts going through my head, so I'll just say a little bit about each one, and then we may come back to them. So one has to do with data visualization. I'll come back to that in a minute. And the other one has to do with this sort of like separation of jobs. And so, you know, Francesca knows that bioinformatics is a thing, you know, and astroinformatics is kind of almost a thing, and it didn't used to be. And it used to be that in astronomy and physics, people did the whole gamut from, you know, some bench-like experiment to all the computing that was necessary. And this is why this university has that problem with physicists, you know, keeping clusters in their closets and stuff and not wanting to be part of the environment. And it's gotten to the point where there's a lot of collaboration that you heard about today, where there's, you know, AI experts, and then there's, and a lot of the students, I mean, like the most recent professor we hired in astronomy is Ashley Villar, who's an AI person who's part of this, but she's also trained in astronomer. And, okay, this is gonna sound really ridiculous, but who here has ever heard of Gilligan's Island, the TV show? You're all too young, okay? But anyway, there was this TV show, there was this guy called the Professor who could do anything, okay, except make a boat to get them back to the island, but never mind. But they were stranded on an island. But anyway, I don't think anybody can do that now, and I think that like the specialties are really necessary, and I think that the line between being, you know, an AI expert and being a computer scientist and being an IT person and being an astronomer, all of those lines are moving, and I just worry about, you know, recently I wrote a really amazing Python program in 3 seconds with ChatGPT-4 that I could not possibly have written because I don't know Python that well, okay? And it was to get to my other point, an interactive visualization tool. And like, I knew exactly what I wanted. And so by the way, you can do this. Say, type into ChatGPT-4, say, I want an interactive visualization with the following adjustable parameters for an anharmonic oscillator, and I'd like it in Python, and I don't want more than 2 controls or something like that. And it's like the first try, okay? And so if you can do that, then what is it that you have to know about programming? And you say like, okay, well, maybe that's great. Nobody has to know anything about programming. But that's wrong, okay? Somebody has to know something about programming. So anyway, what I think about for the next 50 years is like, what is that division of labor? And how do people collaborate with each other and with machines? So anyway, I'll come back to the visualization thing later. That's too much talking.
Carlos, what are your thoughts?
So I think that from particle physics, maybe large physical experiments, we're still not as advanced as astronomers in sharing data, and I think that's a problem of our community. So I think making more data public is going to enable people to try new things on experiments. And for some reason, particle physics experiments are very secretive with their data and their simulations. We recently had a good experience where we put simulation out and there was a KL contents, and then people came up with new solutions that were actually better than our own solutions. So maybe that's helping change mentality. I very much, want to echo this issue of that it sounds like we need to move, at least from the particle physics point of view, like to a multidisciplinary work where we can really connect with people that are doing computer science or AI or not. Now, what is the limits? I don't know. I mean, for example, we are just really getting started with large language models in our experiments with things like self-supervised learning and programs like that. It's kind of amazing how we have looked at this data set, for example, for 10 years with like our best algorithms, and then ops comes AI and changes it completely. So it's very hard to predict what not only is going to be in new data, but what's also going to be in our old data we've already collected. And then finally, I also see a very interesting interface with people doing detection or like hardware R&D. Like the detectors can become much smarter to find the signatures that we really care about, not running our silly triggers that we have sometimes.
Okay. Lina, what are your thoughts?
I think first I also want to talk about the data since we brought it up. I think also we had a nice discussion with one of the audience like about the data privacy. So I think the field that I was talking about, like because really relate to like our daily life is like human data. It's actually very difficult to share, right? When if you share it, kind of making the customer feel like seriously, are you going to share the data? Are you going to share the data? So there will be, I think the IRB kind of was helping that. And so I don't know what's a really clear path to do it. It's always going to be like a lot of things need to be worried, like taking care of it. So right now, for the data being for the power system data, there's no way to share. Like it took me multiple, like 8 months for the NDA to be written down with me and the collaborator from the industry, and there's a lot of things going on. So, but then on the other hand, if the data can be shared, then more researchers can come to help. So that is the question. So I think like it's not like as an individual person we can solve it. So now back to the future of the AI. So if, for me, I don't want to predict because things happen too fast. Like, we don't know. The ChatGPT, actually, I use the GPT early version because I think it's not called a 3, it's another name because my husband is a CS background. So he is excited about all the things. He forced me to use it, and I like, this is bullshit. Like I tried, like, this is a bullshitting. I'm not going to use it. But then, like 11 months later, then the ChatGPT like 3 come, and oh my god, this is a big chance. So it's changing too quickly, and I'm also using it like to do the coding of the thing. I totally agree. I think for Python, because sometimes when I have time, I went through to check the original textbook, right? So what's really the fundamental definition of their language? To me, like there's some actually also AI experts saying Python is really a terrible language. He actually said that. I agree. So there's so many places it will make mistake and you don't know it's mistake because the language itself is not that rigorous. And I even told my student, like, I don't know whether I'm going to trust your code in the future. Like, but there's one thing for the application, something I like application, is eventually I have the product. Even if I make error in my code, like for the ultrasound machine, it's worked, right? I can help the patient. I can have this coming back to the ground truth. The experiment is testing my product. I wouldn't say it's the code, everything is really exactly what I was talking about in the paper. I think no one can even say that even for those older deep learning methods. But then this is the outcome. You can see the outcome. It's work as a product. Engineering, there's some engineers don't need a math, right? So I'm in the electrical engineering. So I have my colleague doing experiment, right? Eventually I have a product. It's a power electronics device. It's functioning. It's work. So that's something that making me feel like I'm very optimistic, right? Of those robotics, I think for the robotics, similarly, there are model-based people, like they don't trust the AI. Even them, those experts studying, changing like their perspective. Yeah, now I think the AI
can like do a lot for the robotics. And robotics, I think, is this year, if you check me, because I've been having so many friends working in robotics, I can see the changes of that for their robotic dog, what they can do before, what they can do in a month. It's all changes so quickly. Yeah, like I don't have a prediction. But then one day I'm worried. My kids worried because I had a conversation, show them the cool videos. So my daughter is very worried. My son is like liking playing those robotic dogs within my friend's lab. But my daughter was very worried, like, Mommy, what's going to happen in the future? Are we going to control by the robot? Like, I don't want to do robotics. And then she was like, well, if there's too many robotics outside, I would just close my door and not going outside. So even for the young kid, they worry about it. So that's something we probably should. I don't think the people will stop what we're doing. But on the other hand, we need something to figure out what's going to happen, especially once you have a robotics atlas with our like the physical ability and also the super powerful brain. Is it kind of like Terminator things happening?
That's very interesting. I mean, I as someone who doesn't work with things that actually do anything, just works with data abstractly.
Go ahead.
We've certainly seen this transition in what ChatGPT, large language models can do with text and with data, but limited to a computer. They can't touch anything, and we can always unplug them. All right, and it's hard to get a sense of actually what's going on in robotics and whether we're getting close to that singularity where we can't unplug them. And so, from your perspective, you're saying that actually there's that same sort of exponential growth in robotics that we're seeing outside.
Happening. Yeah, because more and more, a lot more and more money went to that field. And all those younger generations, they're just really fascinated about the field. Just go ahead. And with so many intelligence, human intelligence into the field, it's changing very quickly. Yeah.
That is a little scary.
Yeah, my daughter says, I think I'm going to unplug them. But I know that because you have too many robots, right? They will protect them. You're not going to unplug them.
Or invent wireless power.
Yeah. But on that, for the robotics that people we build them because we want to help the people, right? For in the future, for the healthcare and for the like elder care, they have a great potential. So how we can make them to really do the things we want them to do? I don't know. And one was to play with the ChatGPT. Now I'm kind of trying to really just put in the prompt, give me that. Now I will put in the conversation, oh, great work, thank you. I put those into that because I worry about what if one day he can, why you guys are so needy, right? You guys are not polite. So now for my conversation, indeed, I will write like, thank you, this is a great improvement, but can you please do that? I really treat it as a human now these days because I worry about he's going to hate me one day.
It'll remember.
Yeah.
Let's take some questions from the audience. I think that we do want to have a discussion here. Yeah,
I have a question about astrophysics because I wanted to use the domain to phrase the question. For the James Webb Space Telescope is using infrared, and therefore it is choosing to store the data in standard infrared representations. The question is, assuming that the characteristic of the phenomenon that you're looking for or would like to discover must be in the data, is it possible that the data representation that previously exists may actually exclude the very thing you're looking for? Have you thought of that?
Sure. I'm not quite sure what you mean by infrared representation, but if you mean that they're, probing things at infrared wavelengths, then there's a huge amount of effort in astrophysics. First of all, there's this multi-messenger astrophysics, which you heard about today, which is like combining neutrinos and gravity waves but even if you just stick to the electromagnetic spectrum, because of getting back to the free availability of these huge, large data sets, most of the very best papers today have more than one wavelength in them and more than one probe of material.
So more generally, I'm asking, do you believe, is it possible that the forms of data that our machines and representations allow actually exclude things? Are there data structures or are there data acquisition mechanisms that we haven't foreseen that might disclose new things?
Yeah, there are limits. So there was something called stream-based a long time ago that had to do with time series data, and there was this concept Mike Stonebreaker had of this irrational database, okay, where you could actually know, it's kind of like what you were showing with the ice cube stuff. You would know where the interesting parts of the data were, but then you have to use the kind of stuff we heard about today to define what interesting means. And so I think that this is a really good example, like the ice cube thing with all the blank space, right? And so there are much more abstract versions of that. And so I think getting to the point where you could probe the data much more quickly than you can now, especially for the kinds of things that you were hearing from Lina, that will change. And so that is a really interesting question. And so it's not wavelength dependent. It's just that, there are data cubes, there are arrays, there are time resolved things. They go across all these fields, and just ways to search them and access them faster, including this kind of edge computing that you heard about.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so kind of a winding question, but we learned a lot today about kind of using simulations to generate some sort of synthetic data to train supervised ML models and then go from there. But like all of our computing today is essentially like working on pseudo-random functions. So how do you account for the true randomness that we observe in reality? And are you thinking of like quantum computing down the line, and is that something that we can really improve all of our predictions for in the near future?
So that's a great question. At least like in my field, basically, maybe random is not exactly what you want, right? Because what you're looking for is a simulation that at least captures some of the, you can't replicate an exact Milky Way in a simulation, but you want to capture at least most of its properties, so that way you can actually transfer some of the knowledge that you're getting into some simulations into the data, and especially when you're labeling stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's not a problem as of now. I can see it being a problem for things where you don't know at all what you're looking for, and that's why I think maybe moving from supervised learning altogether into something completely unsupervised, like anomaly detection or something, might be the way to go for these problems. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually be more concerned of like data Monte Carlo disagreement, like simulation not being replicated data. That is actually our biggest concern right now. Right. I think the issue of like random number generation is at the time a second order effect for us. Things that we're trying is this like self-supervised models where the machine learns from the actual data to find other things are solutions to that. You did mention quantum computing, and I just want to make a comment related to actually the previous question, because I've been thinking a lot about like lossless data encryption. So in a way that you have this data, and it's true, it would be nice to get some interesting features, but what we call interesting is a time-dependent question. And it would be nice to have some kind of way to have lossless information, and the quantum computers do allow for large, have the large Hilbert spaces in principle. Mm-hmm. So you have things like quantum RAM, so you could store exponentially large amounts of data, and that could be done in a lossless fashion.
So really nice for it's really good to listen to this talk. So my question is like in physics, previously people dealt with like identical particles. So we are seeing like the basic matters, electrons are identical. But now with large language models, we can model these large language models as humans, or proxies for humans, and bring more like a heterogeneity into this. Imagine we can basically replace the spins or electrons with large language model agents and simulate the kind of their interactions. Well, in that case, will physics come to help, or traditional quantum field theory or or spin models help in this case?
That's a question for you, Matt.
Yeah, that sounds like a particle physics question. Go for it.
If I understand your question correctly, I think you're talking about kind of an emergent, coherent object, so that you think of a large language model and then maybe they would interact with each other, much like humans interact. Yeah. And then, of course, it's no longer in the domain of physics, it's the domain of psychology, and sociology, and anthropology, and you have to have much more higher level, much more complicated data structures to describe the way these emergent objects interact. So the beauty about physics is you simplify things and you reduce it to objects that actually are it doesn't matter whether a proton is a particle or it's made of quarks. that at some scale you just approximate it as a point, and you have the interactions, and then at different scales you would see the substructure of a proton. But at larger scales you don't want protons at all, you want a table, and you would use this as the object. And so that separation of scales is inherent to the way physics thinks about studying interactions. So large language models can be modeled in the same way, that is at some macroscopic scale, large structure, they form swarms and they interact, and you can model that with physical laws. Certainly, and there's certainly some application of the diffusion equations or the interactions among large language models. So you can apply those same physical techniques. But I don't think you would kind of treat a large language model like an electron and try to study it at the quantum level using the same techniques. You would have to look at what are the emergent laws governing the interactions among those very complicated emergent objects.
Yeah, but in some sense, basically, physics study the fundamental matters and their relations, and we can build mathematical models for these electrons. Say two-state electrons basically modeled by two attributes, and their relations may basically colon interaction. But for large language model agents, if we just now we can definitely not do human experiments like study separate a few bunch of humans and engage them into some kind of interaction or like in some scenario and study their fundamental properties and relationships. But now with large language model, we can build a playground. There's a paper by Stanford. They build a small veil and they put a bunch of agents and set some attributes and study their relations, spontaneous relations. Do you think in that case that physics can come to help? We create a separate artificial society and with large language model as some kind of basic constituents and set some relations between them, and we can, basically we can study them as we study a bunch of electrons in some box.
So my feeling is probably not. Probably it's better to study them like you would study people in a box, because they're so complicated that you need to use some more approximate descriptions. It's not quite as precise and quantitative as physicists would like.
Can I just interject for 1 second?
Yeah,
How many
please.
people have read this book, Determined, by Robert Sapolsky, that came out recently? Okay, you should all read this, and if you're a physicist, you're gonna get really angry because of this conversation. And so he's a neurobiologist, and he talks about how there is no such thing as free will. And basically he's going back to Laplace's demon, where physicists thought, once we've now understood Newtonian whatever, we can every step we can just propagate it forward and predict the entire universe, right? And so now biologists think this about the human brain, and that's what that book says. And they don't understand this difference between you talking about like electrons' behavior and people's behavior. And they're basically saying that people's behavior is electrons' behavior, and then they have to understand quantum mechanics and that there is such a thing as randomness, to go back to your question, and that it's not going to come out like that. But anyway, there's an interesting divide between fields. Sorry?
The author is saying that the biologists are modeling it correctly?
No, the author is saying that the biologists can say that everything is deterministic and that if you take it to the limit, that the entire future of everyone can be predicted, because if we just understood how the brain works perfectly, it's exactly the story from physics from hundreds of years ago, and they don't understand that at the base level it is physics. So kind of like how you model these things, philosophically, is an interesting question. And so anyway, I thought maybe somebody would have also, it's a best-selling show.
What was it? Determined?
Sapolsky? What? The Terminator is the movie that we're all worried about. No.
Oh,
The book is called Determined.
It's about building it.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. Anyone else? Anyone want to ask the panel?
I have actually a question. So I know we keep talking about AI and machine learning everywhere, but that's bring, it's learning all of this data. And of course, you have all of this information everywhere. So the idea is how you're trying to read it and make sense. But because now we have all of this model with AI that create new data that is now trying to learn on top of it. Actually, how is it, trying to gather, being like, okay, now this information is useless because it was or not as useful as before, because now we have this new model of this new information. Let's focus on this information to get the next level. but potentially, of course, just trying to, narrow down the data that you will use, because it's everywhere. So, and as we said, and what we understood, we have the physics and the bio. We're trying to do very ideas and jobs in a way, but how maybe we can bring back some of, the physics with, the math at the time, because it will be useful, but not all the time, trying to gather this information, but use it as we want. I don't know if I'm clear, but the idea is, because of all of this data, how we can be sure that we have the good foundations to after make it grow as we want, and removing maybe the foundation, but take this new information and data to become the next level to, to get more from AI and machine learning. Does it make sense, or am I?
I would say it's a great question, which is unanswerable.
It sounds similar to the kinds of things that you do, acquiring the data and then using it to
I think that's actually even bigger than what I've been working on. I think your question is very broad. Right.
It's sort of like, what if we go down the wrong direction? In other words, to give you a semi-trivial example, as Lina knows, in astrophysical simulation now, people are using AI to fill in steps. They don't calculate all the steps, and they're like, it's kind of the same as over there, and so we'll just fill that in, and then we'll just go from there. But if you make a mistake doing that, you literally have simulated the universe wrong, right? And there's only one universe, but we don't have timescales of billions of years to watch it, so we kind of don't know. You're talking about in engineering, it's really nice. Like, if my device works, who cares if I got one line of the Python code wrong? But, if you get one line of the AI assumptions wrong, it's wrong universe, and, we can't help you.
So on that note.
All right, let's thank our panelists again.